here is a listing of future classes. And what I decided to do was just put in the list for the whole year. So within the most current class, you've got a reference of previous classes that you can easily refer to. And you can see from this, if you look at April, May, June, we're going to work with one couple's charts. Both today is essential relationship needs, next month with synastry, followed in June by composite. And then we're going to take a different couple's charts, July, September, October, and we're going to repeat the same thing. So what I have decided to do is just to jump right into that synastry and composite information that so many of us in segment 2 really want to work with. And I'm going to give us 2 sets of examples to really help ground us in that. And then as we get later into this year, we can decide how we want to move forward with segment 2 from there. I already have the volunteer chart set up, so just letting everybody know after today's class, when we send you the archived link, you will have the charts and the environmental conditionings, and I will put that information out ahead of time in July when we start on the second set of charts. So thank you for bearing with me, April 2014, in this Cardinal Grand Cross as I fly by the seat of my pants through my public classes, through segment 1, segment 2, and through life. Leroy and I living our own life with Uranus in Aries over our composite ascendant in 2014. Next slide, of course, always is just reminding you, if you want some extra information, we have the EAN Astro Library established. You can go to our website and look at these 3 different sections, and you can look for the titles so that you can see the titles to all of the lectures, including their authors, in each of the sections before making any purchase. And so again, the subject of today's class is essential relationship needs. I will be working through a fair amount of the information that is any chart or any slide that's a review from previous months a little faster, so that we can hopefully get through all of our information in the next 2 hours. Just a little review here for you. As we start moving into synastry and composite chart interpretation, we will be working with the 5 primary relation type dynamics, including the 4 variations. We, of course, have looked at 4 evolutionary states. If you want more information on that, there's a class on that in the segment 1 series. The environmental conditionings we speak about so much. I have not done a class on that. Basically, this is the familial, the religious, spiritual, the societal, cultural, the economic, all of the various conditionings that a soul is born into. Those are only known through observation correlation. They don't show up in the chart. And of course, what we're going to move into today is, again, those essential needs. But this is kind of just like the little checklist when you're working with either synastry or composite charts. Here's just a little review for you, setting it up for the PDFs that we archive. The 5 primary relationship types. You can see right there, we looked at this in our February class. And these 5 types: codependent, counselor-counselee, teacher-student, sadomasochistic, self-sufficient. These 5 primary types may commingle. They may also commingle with the 4 variations, which we looked at last month in our March class. Karma mates, soul mates with the subtype same soul, twin souls, and of course souls in different evolutionary states, which we would call evolutionary discrepancy. Also, just a little review as we start to move into those synastry and composite charts as well. When we find what we would call quote-unquote stressful aspects in synastry or composite charts, that's going to start to indicate perhaps difficult or negative karma. Non-stressful aspects in synastry composite charts will perhaps indicate easier positive karma. Most of us have a mixture of both in any relationship, and therefore that reflects that combination of what we would call both easy or positive and negative karma. And of course, none of this is an absolute. We must always observe and correlate. So as we move into determining essential needs, this is a primary understanding. Each individual must have an understanding of their own essential needs that must be met for any relationship to succeed. We're going to go over what we call those essential relationship needs in a lot of detail. But first of all, I'd just like to show you a couple of slides on the subject of procreation from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. We basically have two types of procreation. We have what we call asexual procreation, where any organism simply replicates itself. It's an identical copy or a clone of itself. And what that means is that immune system is basically static. And what all forms of organisms have found over eons of time, and I mean hundreds of millions of years by eons of time, is when you have a static immune system, a very slow, minimal evolution, it leaves the organism susceptible to attacks. And I've listed some of the most basic variations of that. This includes some of my own studies in health and wellness over the last, well, let's just say the 57 years I've been on planet Earth. You may be familiar with virus, bacteria, and fungus. Prions are incomplete proteins that are mutating. The body doesn't know what to do with them. They accumulate in organs and tissues. We know it as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, scraping in sheep scraping their heads, mad cow disease. In other words, we're familiar with prions or mutated proteins accumulating in the brain, but we have found prions to accumulate in all tissues of the body. Also, the Quetzal means insects. It means ancestors who are bitten by insects hereditarily, or we in any lifetime being bitten by insects, major source of compromising the immune system. Malignancies, cancers, mutation of any genes in the body that then start to proliferate. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And of course, parasites, which come from food and also insects. So you can see that in nature, there's a lot of ways that the immune system is susceptible to attack. So over these eons of time, the vast majority of organisms have developed multiple genders. And those dual genders, what we would know as male and female, have evolved to procreate through sexual intercourse. And what happens with that is there's a third entity that's created that is a blend of the two entities that created it. And what this ensures is that the immune system evolves faster. The immune system in general is ruled by the archetype, Neptune, Pisces, and the 12th house. And when we have an immune system that is continually evolving, this better guarantees the survival of any species, as it has to deal with the attacks to its system in the various ways we've just discussed. When we look at it from the perspective of human organisms and what we will call natural selection in natural law, we do this through what we call the pheromones or the scent. How does another smell? Now, due to all the distortions of patriarchal conditioning for thousands of years, we rarely know how to deal with this anymore. We're covering it up constantly. Now, the pheromones are ruled by the inner side of Venus, which is the second house in Taurus. Through my practice over the last 3 decades, especially as I have started working with the Pluto and Libra generation, I have started to include it in the dual rulership. And what you see here is basically what I tell this Venus, or this Pluto and Libra generation, or any soul which has a lot of planets in Libra or a lot of planets in the 7th house. Because what can happen with that outer side of Venus and Libra is we can get so caught up in this recognition of the other that we can run a lot of confusion, that mental air. Who do I choose? Do I or don't I? And so when we look at the choice of another through the scent or the pheromones, again, I have a tendency to tell this Pluto and Libra generation, before you jump in bed, before you exchange the sexual fluids, which is also an exchange of karma, you want to start to have some activities together outside sexuality. In other words, natural activities that allow for exercise or the secretion of the pheromones. And you get up close and personal, and if you have a positive reaction to someone else's smell, it is positive karma. You are free to go forward. If you are repulsed by someone's natural scent, I'm not talking about just necessarily bad breath through food and diet choices today. I'm talking about the sweat glands or the sexual glands. If you are repulsed by those scents, then you want to work to deal or create the best healthy closure you can and move on. If you're up close and sweating together and the natural pheromones feel to be neutral, then the karma is somewhat neutral and there is free choice to move on or stick around, whatever your choices are. Now, this is not only true for the Pluto and Libra generation or those with a lot of Venus and Libra in their chart. This is true for every single one of us humans. We all have Venus, we all have second and seventh in our chart, we all have Libra in our chart. This is the natural way that we used to do it. And it is a way that all of us can return to as we are evolving our souls. So, I'm going to have this slide up multiple times over the next couple of hours, but this is just a slide I had put together in a workshop that I did last fall. And so here's a synopsis of what we are looking at. And I will include this as a PDF in your email with the archived video afterwards. So we're going to start going over this in more detail, but this is a synopsis of how we determine essential needs for any soul that must be met before or in order for it to create any type of successful relationship. Now, if you look at this visually, one of the first things you're going to see from the elongated red triangle is what we call the yod configuration in the chart. And that yod is made up from 2nd, 7th, and 12th house cusps. When we look at that yod aspect, we are also looking at the rulers Venus and Neptune, which equal the lower and higher octaves of love in astrology. Venus is going to represent human love, both from an inner basis, second house cusp, which is self-love, and an outer basis, seventh house cusp, which is sharing love outside of ourselves with another. Neptune on the 12th house cusp is going to represent universal source or unconditional love. So the yod is the natural archetype in which we can understand. Number one, our essential needs, which is going to be the second house, and the second, and of course relationship dynamics, which is going to cover second, seventh, and 12th. So let's move into this. First of all, we're going to start with that second house cusp. And as I speak about this, what I want you to recognize that we're not only going to include the sign that is on the second house, we are going to be including its planetary ruler, wherever that exists, by house sign aspect, that's the abbreviation HSA, house sign aspect, and we're going to be including the inner side of Venus, so that means wherever Taurus is on its own house cusp with its planetary ruler Venus by house sign aspect. Now, one of the first things that this second house cusp is going to represent is the core archetype of physical survival. This is one of the deepest instincts that exist in all of us as human beings, and included in this archetype of physical survival is again that sexual instinct to procreate or perpetuate ourselves. And we spoke about doing it from the human perspective, from sexual intercourse, evolving to that through eons of time to again accelerate evolution and the ability to survive. Now, that instinct to procreate actually emanates from the primary brain. This is co-ruled by Moon Mars, which is a whole nother subject that we can pursue in a future class after we get through some of these basics. The primary brain is located in the back of the brain, just above the brain stem, the medulla oblongata. I may not be pronouncing that right, but that is the primary brain. It is also the inoperable part of the brain. And this was the first brain, that's why it's the primary brain that we evolved into as a species first. We have then come forward with the prefrontal cortex and all the other types of the brain that I'm not going to get into right now. And again, this is a core instinct from the second house cusp, physical survival. After that, what we know as the core archetype of the second house and inner side of Venus is what we will call essential needs. So the physical survival beyond sexual then becomes what we call food, clothing, shelter. The ability to stay alive. Food includes water, by the way. Food, water, clothing, shelter. And once we get past some of those core physical survival needs, then we come to the part of essential needs that we consider our values, what we value, both inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves. And as we move beyond those basic essential needs to the expansion of those essential needs through our values. The values are what gives meaning to life. And so those values create what we perceive to be our needs, which is what creates perception of our desires, how we go after and create or achieve that which we perceive we need. So as we are determining what we value, both inside and outside, giving us clues to what we need and what we desire, this essentially will create an inner magnetism, the inner side of Venus. And that inner magnetism is a vibration of our needs. It goes beyond having a conversation or communication with someone and, I value money, I value a fancy house, or I value a simple life and spiritual pursuits. That value system, along with its needs and desires, is vibrational. And so as that then becomes an inner magnetism, inner reflected outer, it becomes the attraction that we draw to us, how we attract others in. And what we need to recognize is we all attract what we need consciously and unconsciously. And this means that we are all self-responsible for the relationships that we attract in. You know that I love that Rolling Stones song. We may not get what we want, but we always get what we need. I find that to be so dynamic to understanding this archetype of the second house cusp and the inner Venus. Now, Venus has a paradox. It actually rules two signs of the zodiac. The Taurus rulership, which is the inner side of Venus, and the Libra rulership, which is the outer side of Venus. And so as we are looking at Venus from the second house cusp perspective, it will show us what we already have. And this is the concept that we would call self-reliance, all the self words, self-sustainment, self-sufficiency, self-love, the essence of being able to know ourselves. In addition to this perception of what we already have to survive, physically, sexually, values, it then leads us to this perception of what we do not have. So that second house and everything that I described per se will also then show us what we don't have, what we need to find outside of self. And that then is projected onto the seventh house cusp, or Libra, which is represented by the other. So what this paradox is showing us is self-sufficiency versus interdependency. And what the human organism has learned through eons of time is that we survive better together in nature. Now, if we look at this from a matriarchal perspective, this is exactly what this self-sufficiency versus interdependency point is describing. That we will survive and evolve better together. This giving, sharing, and including. If we look at this from patriarchal conditionings and distortions that have evolved over time, This is going to start to bring up the codependencies, the taking, hoarding, excluding. We'll look at this in more detail, as we're moving into examples. Now, as we look at any archetype, we look also at its polarity. So, if we are looking at the second house, cusp, and again, it's planetary ruler by house sign aspect, and also Venus by house sign aspect, and any planets included in this second house, including intercepted signs. All right, that's all part of that picture. Again, inner and outer needs that must be met in order for any relationship to exceed. The polarity of that is the 8th house, the 8th house cusp. So as we're looking to determine essential needs, and we look at this polarity, what does that describe? That archetype, and again, you look at the 8th house cusp, its planetary ruler by house sign aspect, and where Scorpio sits on a house cusp or intercepted, its planetary ruler Pluto by house sign aspect. It's going to describe essential confrontations, inner and outer, that we will attract in order to effect self-reliance, in order to continue to help us learn how to meet our own essential needs. It will also, through those confrontations, show us where we will experience the limitation of ourself and another human being in the context of a relationship. And that exposure of those limitations, the 8th house trining to the 12th, will then lead us to the Neptunian archetype of transcendence. Now we'll discuss this in more detail. And so, before I move on, I want to go back here for a moment too, looking at this and asking, does anybody have any questions to anything that I've said up to this point? You all understanding this archetype of essential needs via the second house, the inner side of Venus. All right, thank you for letting me drink water. I'm going to take silence from Leroy monitoring the board as you're all with me so far. So let's move on. We're going to look at some chart example. And first of all, we're going to look at the female chart. You've got the birth data up here so that you can jot this down and you can draw up the chart on your own and look at this over the next month before we're going to take the two charts we're using into synastry and composite examples. Now, here's where I got to fly by the seat of my pants because I didn't get any review time. And even though I've looked at these charts somewhere over the last few years, I'm looking at them fresh. But let's just break it down in a very simplified way. Environmental conditionings is the soul. Female has a perception of an environmental, or excuse me, an evolutionary state of third individuated, moving towards first spirituated. Catholic upbringing until 8th grade. Left the church at 14, 15, rebelled, stepped out of religion. Family came with her. Mother had books laying around on a lot of metaphysics. And so this person has been evolving into now being pretty nature orientated. Father was the more nurturing parent. Um, this person feels very impressionable with Pisces moon, sun in the 12th house. I'm just going through the environmental conditionings for you. This person's been a nurse for 24 years, moving out of consensus occupation into more alternative, individuating, spirituating occupations. Kind of let's say not participating in long-term relationships into which she has been in relationship with for the last 10 years. And she's also had losses of people who have been close to her. Lost her brother and her first Saturn return, which led her into nursing. Lost a nephew at his Saturn return a couple years ago. Had a strong effect on the family. The father has passed away. Mother is perceived as being unhappy in general. And so as we start to look at this from some of the most basics, first of all, the description. Virgo is the sign on the second house cusp. There are no planets in the second house. Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. Mercury is the blue star over here that exists in the 12th house. It is in a stellium of Leo planets, Sun, Uranus, Mercury. They have a trine to North Node, sextile to South Node. There's opposition here to Chiron. We also would include Venus for the inner side, excuse me, and Venus exists up here on the midheaven in Gemini. Venus is in a sextile to Pluto, Jupiter. It is in conjunct Saturn. It is a waxing square to Mars. So there's the essence of everything that's going to describe essential needs. Now, we could explore this for the next 2 hours, if not the next 4. So as we briefly look at this, when we have Virgo on the second house cusp, there's going to be a deep inner analysis to the essential needs dynamic. This is someone who's going to be turned inward on themselves just by the archetype of Virgo. Its ruler Mercury is in the 12th house. This could lead to confusion of what are my needs. It could also lead to deep inner searching of a spiritual, religious, or transcendent nature, which was described in those environmental conditionings, finding mother's metaphysical books and looking at that stuff from an early on age. That ruler Mercury is in Leo, but it's in the 12th house. That's a very interesting combination when we're looking at the Leo Pisces archetype, which in and of itself, 5th to 12th, Leo to Pisces, is an in conjunct. Who am I versus the world? So is there an over egotism Leo, or is there an under egotism Pisces? Me versus everyone else. I would say that some of the crises this soul has experienced in this life is part of the essence of helping them differentiate themselves from others. Because if you put Virgo on that second house cusp, you can have someone who has insecurity or doubt, Virgo words, about their own needs. Oh, my needs aren't worthwhile. And from that 8th house polarity, Pisces, they could have run into partners who would further that doubt or enhance that confusion, Pisces, of their needs being greater. This person is a nurse as an occupation. Look what that starts to do to their own essential needs in that eighth house or that eighth house confrontation. Oh my gosh, how many times are you a nurse and, especially here in the United States conditionings, many times nursing is crises based. You don't end up at the hospital because you're being proactive in prevention. You're there because you have an acute crisis. And so that confrontation is again furthering sometimes that doubt about their own needs. Over time, as we listen to these environmental conditionings, this soul has gotten to the point of perhaps their own crises. Wait a minute, I count, I value, I have needs. Now that ruler Venus up there in the 10th house, taking on responsibility for everybody else. Venus in Gemini, furthering the confusion of my needs versus others. Venus is in a square to that second house cusp, opposing Mars. This gets carried even into intimate relationships. And so perhaps this person has shied away from relationships because they've had to really internalize this time around to discover what their own needs are. I would also say that if you have Virgo on that second house cusp, there's a sensitivity there. And they've got to be able to find that time alone to honor that sensitivity, to go inward. And so I would say a primary essential need for this partner is going to be someone who can be sensitive to their needs. And if that partner is not that way, this person could draw in Virgo, someone who is highly critical of their needs, someone who plays that de facto God goddess role of knowing what they need. And if they're confronted, eighth house, with that type of partner, it's going to draw them further in. It's going to draw them into being more and more of a recluse because the partner's not meeting the needs. So we have someone who is deeply internal and searching for who they really are and what they really need. We have someone who is very sensitive about their needs. So feedback, our volunteer partner is, this volunteer's partner is on the call. And so let me just stop for a moment. And Leroy, any comments from the board, questions from the board? Our volunteer who is with us, any comments or questions?
I've unmuted Susan. Are you there, Susan? Any feedback?
Yes, I'm here. It sounded pretty accurate, actually.
Anything to add? Anything I missed?
Not that I'm coming up with right now.
Have you had partners in your past who have played that let me heal you, take care of you role?
I would not say that. I would not say. I was very independent back in my 20s. I was sort of rebelling against the whole idea of coming into partnership, but when I did, I was not dependent, and I wasn't really interested in relationships that were going to be long-lasting, truthfully.
So let's reflect on that. From that feedback, we're looking at, of course, a first house Pluto, the Jupiter new phase. And so in most recent past lives, if not this particular lifetime, Pluto 1 degree from the ascendant, this soul has been busting out. I want to be free. I want to know who I am. And we're also looking at the moon square the nose. So there has been some type of skip steps in intimate relationships, moon in the seventh, Pisces. And so perhaps you have fallen in that caretaker role in past lives so much. Not your first lifetime as the nurse, or as Jeffrey Green would say, the Florence Nightingale archetype. So many lifetimes of taking care of others. And so there is this rebellion. And we could, we could almost stretch, Jupiter is square the nodes. We could almost stretch Pluto into being square the nodes by relationship to this moon Jupiter. So then that's going to start adding on to this Virgo second house cusp of I must really go within, Virgo, and find what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Lifelong process, would you say?
I'm sorry?
Would you say this has been your process?
Yes, yes, I think so, very much so.
Okay. Um, the Venus up there in Gemini, square Mars and square that second house cusp. And if I know you said, I noticed in your environmental conditioning, Susan, that there's been some astrology background. So if
Yes.
ever we're not, if ever I'm saying anything you're not understanding, just please ask, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a T-square with Venus and Mars to that second house cusp.
Mm-hmm.
And Venus first square to Mars is going to say, I'm in process of discovering of what my needs are in relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so taking, to me, that Venus up there on that 10th house cups is going to add on to taking charge of discovering what my relationship needs are. And so if ever I'm confused, Gemini, I've just got to go within. Again, second house cusp is yin energy, inner side of Venus. So that just, to me, again, reiterates the sensitivity and that need to discover how to meet your own needs. I would say that you're accelerating along that path.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, I think so. I would
Okay.
say that the Venus-Mars square causes us to have a fair amount of friction at times, although we've gotten a lot better at it.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as me feeling like at times that if I feel like my needs are kind of stomped on, then we have problems.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think it's gotten a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you say early on in this life there was confusion around what you wanted?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. That's mhm. I'd say that's what that T square with Venus Mars to the second house cusp would represent. And then
Mm-hmm.
over time, because we're dealing, with mutable signs here, over time through reflection, then you've been able to gain greater and greater clarity on what that is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Venus in first quarter square to Mars, there's been some necessary confrontations for you
Yes.
with the other, because that feedback is how you've been able to go yes, no, first quarter.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Susan. I appreciate you very much for coming on to the call and being willing to be example for us. Let's
My
move on
pleasure.
to your let's move on to your partner, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So as we look at our next chart here, this is Susan's partner, and here we're going to see Libra on the second house cusp. And so Venus is not only the ruler of the second house cusp, it has the dual role of also being the inner side of Venus. So we're only going to see one blue star. We see two planets in the second house. So they're going to take on extra meaning in determining essential needs for this soul. We have Venus up there in the 10th house as well. It has a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. If we start looking at our aspects here, you can start filling them in for me. We see we have a moon in Aries, opposition to the Mars Neptune. It starts to bleed into a wide T-square with Mercury Cancer up there in that 11th house. We have the sextile to the Sun in Leo, even almost Pluto in Leo in the 12th. You see we have a 12th house Pluto soul here. Venus in Gemini, the Mars, or excuse me, the Uranus, they're sextile to Saturn. And what else do we see going on? We can bring in some other aspects that our volunteer may know in more detail as I'm just glancing at this chart. Now, in regards to the environmental conditionings for this soul, he sees himself as transitioning, third individuated, first spirituated, going back and forth between the two. This person describes himself non-practicing Jewish family, close friends who were very Jewish. So, and yet he felt that these friends, and he had someone who he called his other mother, were exposing him from a very early age to what he describes as spiritual commitment. Currently, he works with evolutionary astrology, considers himself to be shamanic, Hindu, Buddhist, has studied yoga since 1997, works with the plant medicines, oils, stones. Father, he considers second consensus. Mother, individuated. Father had ups and downs in business. Mother was ahead of her time, started a business, was successful. Father balked at first, and then father joined in the business. This person has a third consensus brother who is a 1%er, estranged most of his life, and they have finally been reconnecting in the last few years. Considers himself middle class, lived upper middle class. Father did have a business failure, which catalyzed mother's success. And so this person is finding himself going in and out of consensus reality and basically working to move out of that into the alternative businesses. Practicing evolutionary astrologer, semi-retired IT consultant with computers. It so happens that this person shares a mutual spiritual business with Leroy and myself. We are both facilitators for EMC Squared, Energetic Matrix Church of Consciousness, which is the AIM program of energetic balancing. This is a spiritual technology for healing frequencies via your photograph. We've both been involved with that for many, many years. This person was married 28 years, divorced, friends with ex, with Susan for 10 years, studied metaphysics for 46 years. So, long time practitioner of metaphysics, and he is getting ready to embark on Roger Wolger's deep memory processing training. So we have someone totally immersing himself in metaphysics in most recent years. So let's just again break this down into our essentials as best as we can. And I'm looking at my timing, and I'm going to have to speed myself up a bit. We'll look at this as best as we can, fast as we can. Libra on the second house cusp, essential needs that are going to be so orientated outside of himself, Libra side, outer side of Venus. Essential needs that want to search for what is fairness for himself and others. We look at Mars, balsamic, that Venus, both in Libra. This is a soul who is resolving karma, balsamic, with others. This would be a soul who would draw in past life karma mates, all that Libra energy, in order to have reflection back to himself on what he needs versus what the other needs. This is turning that whole relationship dynamic outside of self topsy-turvy. And so even when this person has been in a long-term relationship, there is going to be a vacillation between my needs versus another's needs. And there might be some clues here. We're going to look at this in the next slides of what gets projected onto the partner. And because we're looking at Neptune and we're looking at Pisces on that 7th house cusp. We'll delve into this more deeply in future slides. Now Venus is up there in that 10th house, just like his partner, so there are some clues that this person has been working to determine what his own essential needs are. In Gemini, there could be some confusion around what that is. Balsamic Uranus, there could be upsets, surprises, those famous traumas that can come along that leads to some pretty intense conversations. Gemini and Mercury in the T-square with Mars, Neptune about those conversations. I would say the essential needs for this person, there is a need to be in relationship, Libra. And there is a need to have a lot of communications about relationships. Venus and Gemini, ruler Mercury in that T-square, and the whole Libra cusp. And as this person has been moving through this lifetime, 12th house Pluto, Mars, balsamic, Neptune, Pisces on the 7th house cusp, this person has a deep essential need to really be spiritualizing deep, intimate relationship. I have to sneeze. All right, I'm back. And so I'm going to move ourselves along a little bit, and I'd like to bring Daniel on because he's been studying evolutionary astrology so intently over the last few years. Daniel, what did I miss quickly?
I think you touched on all the points. There's not really much that I can add. There's no question that most of my karmas, my unfinished business, have come back to me through relationship, and my long-term marriage really ended because we just there was that evolutionary discrepancy that you talk about, where I was just moving along the line towards spiritualizing, and she was not, and it just created too much of a distance between us.
Interesting how you were married 28 years, so it took the Saturn return of the relationship to bring about its separation. Because when there's evolutionary discrepancy, it takes a lot of work to remain in a relationship that long. And so there could be some of the Libra second house early on, what we will call the neediness, the need to be needed. as one of your essential needs. And then eventually learning how Mars, Balsamic Neptune, to internalize that relationship from outside of yourself to inside of yourself. We'll look at that some more with as we move on. All right, anybody else before we move on? Questions or comments? Thank you very much, Daniel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Questions or comments from anybody who's on the board listening? All right, you're all being very nice and quiet. So let's look at this slide again. And you will see here in this little nutshell of how we look at essential needs. We're not going to be able to look at the spatial relationship by slides of Venus-Mars in detail. I am including it as we're looking at this. And if we look back at Daniel, whereas Susan had Venus first quarter square to Mars, Daniel has Venus in a disseminating phase, almost approaching the disseminating square too, or actually if you use that 10-degree orb, it is disseminating square to Mars. And so there's a crisis in consciousness from Daniel's perspective. What do I value? What do I need in relationships? So we're going to have to be a little faster with this, but again, one of the things I want to look at over time is eventually with these classes to just go through Venus, Mars in the 8 phases from the perspective of relationships. So here we are, we're going to move into the 7th house cusp, where we look at our conscious expectations and needs onto relationships and those lessons for equality. So when we start to work with this perspective or this component of essential needs, we're not only going to look at the sign on the 7th house cusp, its planetary ruler by house sign aspect, which again will be Venus. Here it will be Venus from the outer side. We're also going to look at where Libra is, and I'm sorry, we've missed Taurus as we've been going through this. We're covering a lot in 2 hours. This is why we're going to repeat 2 sets of charts, because when we do it the second time around, we're not going to have to look at these slides about what it is. We'll go right into the details of everything and try and spend a little more detail with the interpretation. So, but we will look at where the Libra house cusp is, and then of course Venus itself by house sign aspect. So what that 7th house cusp represents is this core archetype of initiating relationship outside of ourselves. This is where we project our essential needs, that 2nd house, out there to survive with another and to discover what we value outside of ourselves and to have another meet those values outside of ourselves. So we will do this on that 7th house cusp through the diversity of relationships that we will initiate in order to discriminate who meets and does not meet our essential needs. And so what we find is, again, 2nd house cusp to 7th is what we call that inconjunct aspect. And that's where that discrimination is not only an archetype of the 7th house, it is also an archetype of the 6th house Virgo Mercury, the inconjunct. Because as we're going through these relationships and looking for who meets or who does not meet our needs, that not meeting our needs is the lack. This person doesn't meet my needs. And I'm recognizing this through my interaction with them. It also sets up those lessons of learning to give and receive. But first of all, Let's look at what happens when we interact with someone who we determine is meeting our essential needs. We project those needs onto them, and we then expect them to meet those needs. And this is what we call that basis of conditional love. I will love you if. I will love you if you meet my needs. To bring home the bacon. Take out the garbage on Tuesday afternoons, as I like to joke. Fill in the blanks. This is what that whole essence of the seventh house cusp and everything related in bold is going to describe. Again, it also is teaching us giving and receiving. And when it's conditional love and those needs are projected and expected, that conditional love means I'm going to give you what I think you need if you give me what I think I need. And if that's not happening, this sets off what we call the outer Venus or Libra archetype of the psychology of listening, in order to learn how to get past some of that conditional love in meeting another's needs. It's where we learn how to objectify ourself versus another. It is also in listening to another where we recognize how to do it on an equal basis, the giving and the receiving. And here's a real biggie for the seventh house cusp and the outer side of Venus. Learning when to give and when not to give. And when not giving is the greater giving. When not giving in just learning how to step back and allow the partner to do it for themselves versus control. So the goal is that relationship equality when we're listening. But what can be exposed is, again, all of those inequalities in that relationship with someone outside of ourselves. And that sets off that crises, again, that inconjunct 2nd to 7th. And the purpose of that inconjunct is to evolve the relationship. The inequalities are going to expose where we have excessive dependencies, where we ourselves are dependent on the other, where our partner is dependent upon us, or where it happens both directions. We can both have excessive dependency upon another, trying to control through that inequality, trying to control through the manipulation or the victimization of another. Both the Virgo and the Scorpio on either side of that 7th house. That when we're dealing with that 7th house, and we have all those crises, and we have to learn how to listen and communicate, we learn about ourselves comparing and contrasting with the other. In other words, relationships, 7th house Libra, social interaction is a bottom line basis of feedback to know ourselves versus the other, 7th versus 1st. Again, how we learn who we are as a unique individual, how we learn who another is as a unique individual. And that inequality that sets off the crisis, that causes us to listen, and then gives us all the feedback, it's how each of us learn our own individual role in the relationship. And in essence, what we would hope is, again, create or evolve that relationship into an equal one, minimizing the projections. Now, what has a tendency to happen when we have these conscious projections onto the relationship is polarity, first house, when our needs are not being met, when we're not listening or the other isn't listening, we get thrown in back on to ourself. This is where the polarity of the first house gets ruler, house sign aspect, and wherever Aries is on a house cusp with the ruler Mars by house sign aspect, this is where we have to have a self-identity and actualize it. Mars, Aries, ourself. But it's also where we have to learn how to see the reality, the self-identity of another. And when we are thrown back in on ourselves, that first house cusp, who am I? What's my reality? What's my identity? That is what helps us feed into being in a relationship as an equal. It helps enforce the listening, giving to another as they actually need. When we have a clear sense of ourselves and who we are as a unique individual, that is going to help feed into seeing that in another and our partners seeing that in us. So let's move into these same charts and looking at this as example. So now we're going to move to looking at the 7th house cusp. With our female example, we see Aquarius on that 7th house cusp. The ruler Uranus is over there in the 12th. It is in that stellium again with the Sun and Mercury. We've already looked at the fact that Venus is up there in the 10th house in Gemini in that first quarter square to Mars. So let's just start looking at when we have Aquarius on the 7th house cusp. We are looking for a partner who will be a friend. That Aquarius archetype of like-mindedness. Aquarius with Libra, it's going to emphasize that need to have friendship. It's going to emphasize that need to have some type of objectivity, doubling up on the communications for this person. With the ruler Uranus over there in the 12th house and sandwiched in that Sun Mercury stellium. And I'm going to jump forward a little bit here, and this will help us time-wise. All right, we're going to move into looking at that 12th house cusp and planets in that 12th house. This person is going to find itself in relationship with another who will somehow, some way point out where she projects onto them her ideals and expectations. In the same regard, she is going to point out to her partner how they project their ideals onto her. If you remember, the 12th house cusp was unconscious projections that we have on to another. Now, what gets to be an interesting dynamic for this chart in the 7th house is while we have Aquarius on that seventh house cusp, and I want to be high-minded, I want to be friends, I want to communicate, I want everything to be equal. Aquarius can sometimes have a little bit of that standoffishness. And underneath that, we have Moon in Pisces and we have Mars in Pisces, both of them in that seventh house cusp. Here again, there's going to be an expectation that the partner recognizes how sensitive they are. But this person with Aquarius on the seventh house cusp is not necessarily going to be projecting that. They could easily be doing Libra, side of Venus, seventh house. They could easily be projecting, again,
Aloofness.
hiding their own aloofness. There, thank you. Hiding their own feelings, pretending they don't have feelings. Thank you. That Aquarian aloofness that then leads them, to feel disappointed. They can jump back to the second, that the partner doesn't recognize how sensitive they are. So it becomes important for this person, Uranus conjunct Mercury over there in the 12th, to communicate back to the partner just how sensitive they are and how that sensitivity must be met in relationships. Susan, do you feel this is accurate?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We frequently accuse each other of projecting onto each other, but definitely I've been told I do think that that my sensitivity is apparent, and yet I'm constantly told I'm too independent and just doing my own thing. So that's exactly what you said, yes.
So you yourself, with that seventh house cusp, have a cover-up or a projection of, I don't need anybody. And yet, as we're starting to look at this dynamic, you have a lot of sensitivity with that Virgo second house cusp, the 12th house planets, the planets in Pisces in the 7th. Perhaps there might be sometimes the projection of aloofness, or let's just be friends, not letting anybody in with your early relationships. Those were, again, your own coping mechanisms in conjuncts to protect your feelings of vulnerability. That Pisces moon, square the nose. That Mars in Pisces. And so, again, going back to that ruler Uranus Leo 12, its purpose sometimes has been the intensity of the shocks and throwing you back in upon yourself, first house Leo rising, to say, wait a minute, stop projecting my aloofness, stop pretending I don't have needs, start honoring my sensitivities, and valuing the ability to communicate that with the partner, no matter how vulnerable it makes me feel, no matter how exposed it makes me feel. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do.
And so as you can speak up for yourself, as you can walk through those feelings of vulnerability, as you can expose yourself, and you're going to evolve your relationship into being one of a partner who can see your needs better, meet your needs better. We're going to evolve that sense of equality.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you need to add to that, honey?
No, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Anybody else from the board, Leroy? Comments, questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. Let's look at Daniel's chart then here from the 7th house cusp and use another example again. So look what we have here on the 7th house cusp of Daniel's chart. We have Pisces on the 7th house cusp. Its ruler Neptune, as we have seen before, is down there, over there in the 2nd house in Libra. And Neptune has an inconjunct aspect to the 7th house cusp, as well as Mars that is conjunct Neptune. We looked earlier at the fact that Venus is up there in Gemini, outer side of Venus. It is balsamic to Uranus. So if we look at some of the conscious expectations that Daniel may make out there onto his partners, we mentioned it already in our last interaction. He kind of expects the partner to see how sensitive he is. He may wear it on his sleeve with Neptune. He could possibly, it could go both ways. He could himself be the extremes of a giver. Pisces on the 7th house cusp. Give, give, give. If I give a little more, my partner will see me, value me, love me. He could do the other extreme of Pisces, which is, please take care of me, partner. I'm hurt. I'm the victim. I need you. He could expect that partner to be as spiritually aware or questing as he is, and then experience the disappointment when the partner has no interest in it. Or, as Daniel has actually shared from a previous long-term relationship, it was something that the partner was incapable of doing due to evolutionary discrepancy. The partner just wasn't there yet in their evolutionary consciousness. So it would throw Daniel, Virgo, on that 1st house cusp. It would throw him back into himself, internalizing and kin to asking those questions, how can I be doing all this giving to a partner and yet they're not there, they're not interested? It could lead to the internal, external criticisms with the partner. When he does all the giving, he could feel that disappointment. And why can't you see this? And if he would, Pisces, fall on the victimization side of that, he gets thrown in on himself, internal, external criticism. It could be the partner criticizing him. Why am I doing all the giving? So there could be these extremes, or the energy going back and forth, the inequality of the giving and the receiving. And thrown back in and upon himself with that Virgo on that 1st house cusp. And ruler Mercury up there in Cancer, it's in the T-square. That Cancer, Mercury Cancer is also in the 11th house. He would have to, when he's throwing in on himself, first house, that Mercury would have to objectify. Wow, I have got to meet my own needs. I've got to minimize what I'm projecting onto the partner. I've got to stop, giving excessively. There could be a back and forth energy. Going back to ruler Neptune Libra with that Mars second, there's a back and forth between the extremes of giving too much or not giving at all, or giving inappropriately in regards to what the partner actually needs. Daniel, give me some feedback on this.
Yeah, again, you're spot on. All that Libra in me often, and Leo sign often shows up as, giving, 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 and hoping that I'll get something in return. And most of the time I come back empty-handed. And the Mercury Cancer with, Moon 8th house. And what you're not seeing here is that my Moon is also conjunct Juno. I get very committed to my relationship, so it's hard for me to let go. I stay very, very attached. It's almost, almost a form of emotional codependency that the relationship, is feeding a, deep need that I have. So that's generally what happens. And yes, I would say that at times, that Neptune on my ascendant, at times I feel, that I can be a caretaker or be, someone who can help, take care of someone else, but the lunar cycles hit me. That Cancer, sometimes I withdraw, and I need someone to come and nurse me as well. So I do go through both of those cycles, and Susan and I have changed roles, on and off for a relationship where she will nurse me through a hard situation, and then another time I will nurse her through a hard situation. So. We've learned to balance that sense of support for the other, and to recognize that we are in this together, and we need to just accept each of us unconditionally, whatever we go through, because those are why we're together.
If we would look at those 5 primary relationship types, and look at where both of you are with your evolutionary states. We're looking at that evolution, 3rd individuated, 1st spirituated. So we're trying to affect this process of moving from karma mates to soulmates. You're trying to move from perhaps various degrees of that codependency into various degrees of self-sufficiency. And at this point in your evolution on planet Earth, by your age factors and life experiences, you're again learning to move through some of those extremes of the codependency and move it into an inner exchange of interdependency, and learning to affect more and more self-reliance through the relationship. Let's see, do I have any comments or questions from the board, Leroy?
Well, this might be a good time for this enhancement, or perhaps a resolution of these 2 charts. And I'm going to mute Daniel here. We had a student actually drop their composite chart. So what we found...
You're skipping ahead.
Oh, we're going to get there today? Okay.
We are going to spend next month with these 2 charts, and we are going to look at the synastry between these 2 charts. And then we are going to spend the 3rd month looking at the composite chart. So yes, I am aware that you're going to want to be chomping at the bit with everything. So what I would like for those of you who are out there, either live or watch or listening to this and perhaps showing up at future classes, I would like you guys to be prepping yourself and starting to work with these two charts from a synastry perspective. Make your own notes. What can you bring to the next two classes? And so, yes, we have, I know we could just jump right in, but I am going to pause us for a moment and say, whatever your notes are, and again, I don't look at the Q&A when I'm teaching. It's too distracting for me, so I have to rely on Leroy. Make some notes and bring it to future classes. All right? I'm sorry. We have to teach. I have to teach in a linear fashion. And that gets very frustrating in the world of astrology. Okay, so Leroy, I apologies for that, and apologies to who's ever making the comment. But I value you bringing this to the future classes. Other comments or questions before we move on? All right. So now here we are looking at the third component to what evolutionary astrology looks at in determining essential needs. And this is where we move into the 12th house cusp, and we look at the unconscious expectations and needs with respect to the ideals we each have that are projected onto the partner. And included in that is the polarity 6. So as we glance at what this is, that 12th house cusp, whatever sign's there, its planetary ruler by house sign aspect, and of course, where is Pisces by a house cusp, along with its planetary ruler Neptune by house sign aspect. So what that in essence is going to represent is the core archetype of what we call transcendence. And transcendence is where we want to transcend, move beyond the limits of a space-time existence, our physical existence. Transcendence is where we want to embrace the ultimate meaning in life. It is the process of spiritualizing our consciousness. And so, that 12th house cusp is where we are going to have both conscious and unconscious ideals that are going to be projected onto relationship needs and expectations. 12th house in conjunct to the 7th. So those unconscious expectations that get projected onto another represent the desire to have a perfect relationship. Now, due to our patriarchal conditionings, who of us have not been exposed to the fairy tales and the happily ever afters? The fairy tales, the nursery rhymes, the rom-com movies that are out there. They're all going to be those patriarchal projections and expectations that somehow, if we just meet the right person, we get married and be happily ever after. Ha ha. But what this does is this sets up that basis of de facto God-Goddess projections, where we unconsciously expect that partner to be perfect, and we expect them to be our ideal or the manifestation of source energy, an alive embodiment. It also is how we project that ultimate meaning in life onto another. And what this sets up is that whole basis of disillusionment. Disillusionment is a 12th house Pisces Neptune word. And with that inconjunct from the 7th to the 12th, or in this case, the 12th back to the 7th, we have that realization that the partner is not perfect. And this also comes from, again, that ability or that polarity of the 6th house to the 7th. And so what we're going to find then is that the disillusionment is necessary. It's a necessary archetype to the 12th house because it helps us readjust our consciousness. And what it teaches us is that transcendence must be found within ourselves versus unconsciously projecting it out there onto the partner. And here in the yod configuration is where we're going to look at the 12th to the 2nd. That is a sextile, which is a more harmonious aspect. It's going to reflect the need to relate back to ourself in a transcendent manner. It's also going to reflect the need for ourself to have a relationship with universal source. And from a sextile aspect, all right, this is going to reflect the ability that it's easy to have a relationship with source energy if we stop projecting it on the other and we learn to have it from within ourselves. So when we learn to create that relationship within ourselves with source energy directly, that which we call our essential needs, or that which we value, give meaning to in our life, project out there, evolves. And what it does is it evolves from having to be temporal, or what we call out there in that physical space-time manner that we've got to have for survival, that we've got to have to interact with somebody, that we've got to have that physical reflection in order to know ourselves or have value. We go from temporal to ultimate. And so this is how we are looking at that sextile from 12th to 2nd. This is how we are looking at the ability to evolve our needs, to evolve the whole essence of our essential needs. And this comes through having a relationship with ourselves, 2nd, relationship with another, 7th, and relationship with source energy, 12th. So we are evolving our relationship with ourselves and others as we look at not only the 12th house cusp and everything involved therein, but also the 12th to the 2nd and its sextile. So what we have is this realization that each and every soul has an innate divinity, has an innate divinity that has been created by Source itself. And so anything we want to project as an ideal, conscious and unconsciously, onto the partner can be met by ourselves, actualized by ourselves. And as we start evolving and transcending those ultimate values and meanings, we are evolving further and further onto the spiritual path. by basis of relationships, inward, outward, source energy. That itself is representing that whole big spiral of why are we here, of transcending. So this 12th house cusp then, as we recognize all of this, and as we look at that in conjunct 12th to 7th and the partner not being perfect and really not meeting our needs in every way, and we look at the 12th to the 2nd and the sextile and how we need to have that relationship with source energy directly ourselves, this then becomes the basis of unconditional love. 12th house, all of that, all the bold represents unconditional love, that potential within us to achieve it, versus the 7th house, conditional love. And so when we start activating this 12th house cusp, Neptune, Pisces, etc., what happens is we create a vibrational shift within ourselves. Remember that 2nd house inner magnetism that then draws in the 7th house outer attraction? When we are really activating that 12th house and Pisces, Neptune, we vibrationally shift ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And that's going to shift everything in relationship with self, others, and source energy. So then what we're now recognizing is that inner and outer Venus, that lower octave of love, can now actualize the higher octave of love, Neptune. Conditional love evolves into unconditional love. And that vibrational shift, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, shifting that inner magnetism, that evolves our relationships. We attract in another who has done the same, or through the process of a relationship, we both do it through the relationship. So here we're just describing that whole process of expansion in consciousness through this yod, and moving from, in a different way of saying it, from consensus, individuating, and spirituating. And I'm not saying 2nd is consensus, or 7th is individuating, or 12th is spirituating. Consensus, individuating, and spirituating exists on each of these house cusps. Human consciousness is complicated, and we're just seeing this reflected through astrology. If you thought segment 1 and just studying the individual archetypes of astrology was complicated, wait till we keep moving through segment 2 and we start putting all these dynamics together. 5 primary relationship types, the 4 variations, all the environmental conditionings, all the evolutionary states, and all that stuff mixed in together. Now we're adding on the yod and essential needs. And now, after this, we're going to go into synastry and composite charts. It is a deep and complicated subject to teach. And hopefully, as we move through these webinars month by month, we can break it down and put it all together better yet. Now, we also, again, that 6th house polarity. Now, can you see how we can have that crises of reality, the existential voids, when our projected ideals are not met by someone outside of ourselves? And can you see how it can create those 6th house, Virgo, Mercury, criticisms and confrontations, and our projections need to be thrown back in upon ourselves. We need to own them. We need to become more conscious of them. And as we do that, then what we're going to want to be doing is reaching for a deeper ability to communicate this in a relationship, to more clearly communicate it, and then each person takes back the responsibility for their own projections. Again, that then creates all that 12th house ability to reach for that unconditional love, because we're minimizing the projections, expectations, and ideals on the ultimate level. All right, so let's look at our examples. Let me see my time. All right, I think we can do this. As we move back into Susan's chart, we see the 12th house cusp is Cancer, and its ruler, the moon, is got a star, and so it's over there in the 7th house. You know that it's square the nodal axis. And of course, Neptune is down there in the 3rd house. She's also the Neptune in Libra generation. Pisces is there on the 8th house cusp. And of course, if we've got Pisces on the 12th, we have got Capricorn on the 6th. And so if we just, again, break it down to unconscious ideals that are expected, projected out there. When they're Cancer, what can happen is the soul can have an unconscious expectation that the partner is just going to be able to recognize all of their emotional needs on the deepest and most sensitive levels and automatically meet them. All of the inner wounds as a child from the early environment, even from the accumulation of past lives, the early environment and wounds as a child, all of that will be projected out there for the partner to meet. And as we're starting to put this picture together, and we're dealing with this 1st house Pluto who's trying to rebirth themselves, who has this dichotomy of freedom and sensitivity, who, has buried all that sensitivity under aloofness. Whenever they've gotten into relationships and get past, just the dating acquaintance scene and start moving into a relationship with someone, if they draw in a partner who, doesn't start to recognize that sensitivity, then that Cancer energy withdraws. All that Leo energy withdraws. 12th to 7th, the aloofness increases and the independence comes right back out. And if we add in then, let me back up, with that ruler, or with Neptune, again, and its component down there in Libra and the 3rd, either it's going to intensify communications and projections of communications, or it could be some confusion in communications. Mercury is in the 12th, all right, and it can really create for intensity in communications. Woundedness comes along even more. We start to see Chiron in there. And with that Capricorn over there on the 6th house cusp, this person again could tire of feeling like they're always the parent in the relationship. They're always being wounded in relationship. Capricorn 6, ruler Saturn, Scorpio, down there in the 4th house cusp, they can sometimes feel blindsided in an intimate relationship with the degree of intensity to which they can feel hurt. And what is going to have to be recognized, Capricorn 6th house cusp, is there's going to have to be a maturation process in recognizing the history and the degree to which they've been hurt, projecting out there that the partner can meet all of their needs. Moon, Pisces, 7th house, square those nodes. And so that transcendence process here means that they have literally got to find the inner lover. That moon, Pisces, has 7. Going back to that 12th house cusp with Cancer, they have really got to deepen their own spiritualization process, find that inner lover, be able to actualize themselves through a relationship directly with source energy. That will then go back to activating that 2nd house cusp and recognizing what their needs are and the sensitivity that exists within their soul. And as they are actualizing that spiritualization process, it will calm them down. And it will calm down all of that 1st house Pluto, Jupiter defensiveness. And I don't need anybody. And that, freedom energy. Now, just for a moment, if this was a consensus chart, all right, this would be a soul who would possibly turn to religion, become a born again, could look for a partner who would become as religious as them. There'd still be projections. It would work for a while. But there'd be eventually another cycle of projections, consensus, that could further the wounding and further the defensiveness. I don't need anybody. As we're looking at this through the individualization and spiritualization awareness and consciousness, and this soul is opening up day by day, year by year, lifetime by lifetime, through recognizing that there are no substitutes for God, Goddess. And as this person is really affecting that spiritual path, there can be an evolution of intimacy that allows them, again, to really learn how to feel fulfilled in relationship. Because they're not looking for the partner to be God and to meet those emotional needs on the deepest level possible. They recognize they have to meet those needs. And they do that in relationship with Source. So again, that's where there, as there's that expansion of consciousness, there's a calming down for this soul. And they can honor the sensitivity. At the same time, they honor that freedom and individualization and just expansion of creativity that wants to be reborn, because they recognize they have a direct link. They have a direct link to source energy, and they are manifestation of source, spark of source. Susan, does this work?
Yes, very good. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate the fact that I, just going over the need to recognize my thinking that Daniel should recognize all my emotional needs and inner wounding. And so I understand that. I'm getting that. And so, no, the rest of it, I loved it. Yeah, it's really good.
All right. All right. We're going to move along unless there's a burning question or comment, and you, Leroy, will interrupt if there is. So let's apply this 12th house concept to Daniel's chart now. And here we're looking at Leo on that 12th house cusp. And its ruler, the sun, is conjunct that 12th house cusp. The 12th house is 4 degrees Leo, 23 minutes. The sun is 4 degrees Leo, 21 minutes. 2 minutes inside the 11th house before a conjunction with the 12th. So we will speak to that dynamic. We have not brought in the fact that we are looking at the sun square the nodes, which may or may not be skip steps. We have to observe and correlate that. And we're looking at Neptune, which we've spoken about a couple of times already, being in Libra, balsamic conjunction with Mars in the 2nd house, involved in a YT square with Moon and Mercury. There may be another aspect or two that I might be missing. We've got a 6th house cusp, a polarity of Aquarius, ruler Uranus up there with Neptune, balsamic to Uranus. So let's break this down and look at this one. When we are looking at Leo on the 12th house cusp, there is an unconscious projection of expectations and ideals onto the partner, for the partner to just absolutely notice them to the nth degree. There is an unconscious projection for the partner to make them the center of the partner's world. And the 6th house polarity point, the Aquarius, the shock and trauma comes in, the disillusionment, when the partner does not make them the center of their world. And then that triggers Leo, who will see me, who will notice me, who will love me. The Leonian bottomless pit of neediness and need to be loved. And as we see that the sun is there, it will intensify both of these archetypes. It will intensify with the sun up there, Leo 11th, that need to be a creative force. And because it is square those nodes in 3rd, 9th, Scorpio, Taurus, it will trigger those dynamics of survival, self-reliance, codependency, and 3rd, 9th, it will trigger those dynamics of being noticed and being ignored. The world moving on and not seeing this person. It will also intensify because that sun's in the 11th and we have Aquarius on the 6th. And, you know, the Venus, Uranus, Gemini 10th is part of this too. It'll intensify that shock and trauma, especially when there's those cycles of not being valued or not being noticed or not being acknowledged by the partner or perhaps by the world in the whole concept of creativity and creative talents. And so this dynamic then, not only does it set up the whole shock and trauma, the 12th in conjunct to the 7th sets up that sometimes those extremes of disappointment and disillusionment in the partner. Why can they not see me? I'm right here in front of them. And so what we then have to work with here with this whole 12th house concept is, again, self-love. When you see Leo on the 12th, one of the key phrases that both Leroy and I use with Leo and Pisces, I will, my will, divine will. It's similar. There is a self-love concept with Cancer and Leo, and with Cancer, it is learning to love from himself. With Leo, it's learning to acknowledge from within self. In other words, it's wanting to express that creativity because they feel divinely inspired, whether they're noticed or not. It is having source be able to acknowledge. It is being able to recognize acknowledgement of self from within. It's the painter who sees the beauty of their painting when they never show the painting to anyone, but they feel the inspiration from source, the connection from source. So that bottomless pit of self-love has to be filled up with source energy itself. I will, my will, divine will. How would you have me express myself in the world, source energy? And as they go inward, that 6th house polarity with Aquarius, as they go inward and ask for the inspiration, Uranus will spark Aquarius, the ruler Uranus. They will be sparked with that repetitive message of, this is what source would have you to do at this point in space-time. And as they follow those inner messages from source energy and express themselves that way for the sincere desire to express themselves without expectations, then they'll naturally be noticed by the world. They will naturally be acknowledged and noticed by the partner. And so that 12th house then sextile to Libra on the 2nd, as they learn to self-love, as they go inward for acknowledgement from source energy, and inward looking for divine inspiration from source energy of how to be of service to the world, that 6th house polarity point. It is going to evolve that Libra archetype with Uranus, Neptune. It is going to evolve the magnetism that they put out there and who they're going to attract in as a partner. Because they're not looking for the partner to feed them no more. They're not looking for the partner to acknowledge them anymore. That Libra energy then gets to evolve, and it gets to discover that equal giving and receiving in the relationship on natural levels. And both partners then become divinely inspired to create, because this person is not projecting it out there onto the partner. And then that vice versa gets to come back. And that sun, as they are working for, again, inner love, inner self-acknowledgement, inner expression, then if that sun is square the nodes, and we're looking at that resolution node, North Node, Taurus, ninth house, this soul is affecting self-reliance and deepening of understanding what that is, especially relative to Libra on the second house cusp, and how much has been, you know, projected onto relationships over time. Now let me play with this for you, and I used the example last time. Let me use it this time. If we're looking at this chart from a consensus perspective, all right, there is the good possibility with this type of configuration, and especially this 12th house configuration, there is the good possibility that they won't internalize the relationship with source energy. They will continue to go through lifetimes of disappointment on why won't anybody love me? Why won't anybody see me? Lifetimes of the starving artist syndrome, or if that sun square the nodes, they'll come through with something divinely inspired, but the consensus won't see it till after this person is long gone physically from planet Earth. How many artists in the world do we see that have created things that had no value to the world when they were living, and after they were gone became so utterly famous? To the degree that there is no internalization of self-love and inner acknowledgement and inner relationship with source energy, again, we'll continue to see that the partner can't meet their needs, that the world cannot see them. To the degree that they go inward as they move through that individualizing and spiritualizing process, then that is the degree to which it can evolve into acknowledgement while this soul is walking planet Earth. All right, Daniel, feedback.
My Virgo says mea culpa. Um, Absolutely, and I don't want to take a lot of time because I know you're over time here. But I found a connection to Source a long time ago, and I've never, moved away from it. But I think I've always tried to fulfill the polarity of my generation, to be able to share my gift, whatever it is, with the world, through Aquarius. And what I've learned, through the years, I've learned, number one, the lesson of surrender, because so many times what I had to say wasn't heard. But I keep looking for a different venue, if you would. That it tells me that I need a course change, that there's something else that I should be doing. And remarkably enough, since I found EA and I've been working with it, with people, not just studying it, I have found that I do have an audience, and I've learned to approach that audience with humility and self-effacement and compassion, and not be the authority, and not necessarily be the one who's going to fix all the problems with them, but just to be able to share what I see, and to be able to speak to it, and it's that's been remarkable for me. So I don't think I've given up looking for the audience. I think I've just changed the audience I'm looking for.
Gotcha. How about on a personal level with the intimate relationship dynamic that we're looking at here?
There's no question. I do always want to be recognized. I know that I wear Susan out. I'll get up in the morning and I'll go into some long discourse on something, and she hasn't had her coffee yet, and she needs her space, and so but we've learned to balance that because the two of us are a relationship's always a little leapfrog. One of us grows and the other catches up, and then the other surpasses the first, and we're constantly playing a game of catch up, and we recognize this stuff, but I said to Leroy a few minutes ago that what's happening here is probably the best thing that's happened in our relationship in 10 years. This is an amazingly healing event. So thank you.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. For our listeners, I had another set of charts to use as example here. And at the last minute, this person could not be available on the call, and I'm going, oh, I need another chart example. And, lots going on in Roy and my lives personally, raising a teenager and Grand Cross and just going through life. And so at the last minute, I'm like contacting Daniel. He just popped into my head, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to reach out. So thank you, Daniel and Susan, for allowing Leroy and I to use your charts as example at the last minute. Now, any comments or questions from anybody before we close off? And while I'm waiting for Leroy to check in with the board and me, again, you have these charts. You can draw up the synastry aspects as you start to prep yourself for next month. And you can draw up the composite chart, because we're going to take Daniel and Susan's charts and we're going to use them for the next 2 months and actually apply the synastry to the 2 charts and then look at the composite chart together. And so checking in with Roy, any questions or comments?
Nope, looks like it's good time to close.
All right, thank you everybody for allowing me, as I am teaching these segment 2 webinars, to just free flow the agenda as it evolves. I appreciate being able to do this, and I will see you all next month. Leroy and I did get to see the blood red moon. Be safe over this month of April, and have a fun solar eclipse, and enjoy this Grand Cross, and we will see you next month. Adios.